When I hear the word free trial, when I hear the word getting started, is it worth it? Monetization practices really can mean a lot of things in a lot of different games. And what you pay long term is not as much the concern when you're first jumping in, because if a game is awesome and it's constantly serving you and you're part of this community, assuming that your budget can afford it, it's really no big deal to continue supporting the devs. It's really no big deal to keep putting your money towards something that's bringing joy into your life. But when you first jump into a game, when you first jump into an MMORPG, something that's promising that it's going to take thousands of hours, possibly dozens or hundreds before you really get to the thing you're most excited about, it's hard to decide how to price this. And so the three games that I'm currently covering here on this channel as my primary games are Final Fantasy XIV, World of Warcraft, and Guild Wars 2. I plan to add others. I plan to jump into a ton. I'm playing WoW Classic, which I'd put under WoW. I'm playing PSO2 New Genesis a little bit right now. I want to add ESO back in. I played on launch. But for now, let's just focus on those three. Now, the first thing is, what does it cost to get started? And the answer with all three of these is nothing. They all three have something that is free to get you in the game, but what you get for that is going to range wildly. Let's start with the least content and work to the most, and then talk about where it goes from there. World of Warcraft is going to have the smallest trial of the three. They've moved into a complete new experience with Shadowlands, their 9.0 expansion, and they revamped it. I think it's a better reflection of how the game feels. It's a better reflection of getting you into kind of a little bit of the texture and the lore and what you're going to be killing. It's a better, fast, short recommendation. It's highly, highly, highly abridged. And I think it's going to get you closer to endgame faster, but you're pretty much going to get opted into the subscription not that long in. There's very little to do within the free trial. It's heavily restricted. It's the smallest of the three, but I think it highly represents the pacing of the combat, the texture of the world, how the cosmetics and the UI feel. I think it does a great job welcoming new players in from other MMOs, as well as if it's their first ever MMO, or maybe even their first ever kind of online video game at all, where you have these interactions, you have these UI elements. It's easy to forget that it could be somebody's first ever video game. And there's a lot to teach somebody, as opposed to maybe somebody that's coming in from another MMO where they've not only played video games like this, but they've specifically played within this genre. And so they have an immense amount of base knowledge, and they mostly just need some translation, and they're off to the races. The next up, I would say, is Final Fantasy XIV. They're giving you the A Realm Reborn base game, our 2.0 expansion, as well as 3.0, the Heavensward expansion, allowing you to get all the way to level 60. It's hundreds of hours of content minimum, and then it's very, very easy to stretch that into as far as you want, because it isn't timed, and you can get all the way through the base game and the initial expansion. There's some restrictions around it. Most of those restrictions are tied to abuse, and so you can only have so much money. You can only interact with other players so much. You can't go into PvP anymore because we can't have nice things without people taking advantage of it. And so there are restrictions on it. Most of it's there to kind of protect the paying portion of the base from bad actors, not necessarily to stop you from getting a good taste. They've talked about when they made like the PvP restriction, for example, they want to be able to give that back to the free trials, but they have to find a way to do it where it doesn't cause people to take advantage of it and sell win trading and whatever junk people were doing. So with that, the problem with it is that it represents the oldest form of the content. And so they have gotten better at making content since. They've gotten better at pacing content since. And while the narrative is cumulative, they're better at writing. There's more voice acting. There's more cutscenes. There's more combat. There's just more on the front end. And so it's kind of like going to a bakery and you see the big shiny cake on the shelf and everybody's ranting and raving about it. And they're like, well, I have some free cake, but it's this older cake over here. It's made by great bakers. It's great cake. It's just not as shiny as the new cake. And so it's not necessarily as representative of the current combat systems, the current classes, the current content, as maybe World of Warcraft's is, but you get a whole lot more. Now we move to Guild Wars, and the word free trial doesn't really fit. They call it their core game experience. I don't know that I'd call it that either. I don't know what the right word is because it's kind of bizarre. So they're going to allow you to get all the way to level cap, and level cap doesn't move in Guild Wars from expansion to expansion like it does with World of Warcraft and Final Fantasy. And so it's all lateral. So what's going to happen is you're going to be able to have the entire vertical progression to get to cap and experience the basic things that were there in Tyria on launch. But all the things that have been added, mounts, gliders, various kind of things have been locked away. And so to go left or right, you're kind of in this vertical tube. You can see out, but you can't go left or right. You've got to stay in your lane. And that allows you to do basically the entire level grind. It does allow you to do the entire level grind without paying a dime. Now, the difference between it and these other two games is with World of Warcraft, all previous expansions are free. You pay for the current ones. So as soon as you get to the end of their free trial, as fast as it is, you turn on the subscription, you get access to everything but Shadowlands. You pay for Shadowlands, you have access to everything. You have access to Classic all the time. You can level up, but starting from 1 all the way to currently we're in the Burning Crusade. If you want to skip Classic to get to the Burning Crusade, they sell level boosts. All 3 of these games sell some form of boost. Actually, both World of Warcraft and Final Fantasy will also sell you in-game currency. So there's cosmetics to all 3. Monetization in that sense, all of them are willing to take your money in other aspects. But the subscription covers the vast majority of World of Warcraft content between Classic and Retail, as far as just number of hours that could be spent. And then you pay to be on the shiniest, newest thing, and that's really it outside of your monthly cost. Final Fantasy, you're going to have to, as soon as you leave that, you're going to have to buy a complete edition. You've got to get a hold of that base game, and then when we're in a current expansion, they'll kind of sell that complete edition backwards. It gets into some weird stuff when we're buying an expansion. Somebody's coming out of a free trial because they want to order the expansion, but then you need access to the game, the current expansion. Now, it can feel a little bit awkward when we're in these weird transitions at the end of the 2-year cycle. Both of these games get expansions every 2 years. It shifts between like 700, 800 days, but every other year you have a World of Warcraft and a Final Fantasy expansion, and in between you have content patches that are constantly churning out something that may or may not feel repetitive, may or may not be your thing, but there is a lot of content. Guild Wars, to get into this, you have to buy these expansions. Think of them like big DLCs. They sell Path of Fire and Heart of Thorns. They're currently priced at like $30. They go on sale for $15, but once you buy them, that's it. You've moved out of free trial land and you've moved into a paid customer. That gives you access things to spend in-game gold to buy the premium resource so that you can buy anything off the cosmetic store with in-game gold, given that you're willing to farm enough. That allows you to have access to these various other systems. They also have what's called living seasons, these kind of mini little DLCs. But the total time between expansions and patches is much more irregular. And so, a good portion of that comes from they don't necessarily have the value proposition of you paid me monthly, so I'm supposed to deliver things monthly. Whether or not these companies are always good at it, whether or not they're delivering something that's fair is up to you each and every month to opt into. But that is the value. You paid me $15 for this month's access to the buffet. I'm continually stocking the buffet with new items is the theory. That's the plan. It doesn't mean there's never been content delays. World of Warcraft's in a big one right now. But that's the theory. As opposed to Guild Wars, you can get your kind of best gear for your specialization, and then you can kind of peace out for a bit and just come on back. It doesn't cost you anything. Of the 3 games that I'm playing right now, on stream, I play Final Fantasy 3 days a week, Guild Wars once a week, and World of Warcraft sometimes has made it onto kind of this random MMO Thursdays. It doesn't really have that much room. Off stream, that means that any World of Warcraft progress I have is off stream. I don't really have that much I want to do in Final Fantasy that I can't build into the 3 days on stream. As we look towards the expansion, I'm kind of actually worried that I've got a specific set of things I want to get done, and I don't need to do much off stream to maintain that pace. So there's a couple little things that I check in on, but that's about it. And Guild Wars, I played quite a bit off stream. So you would think, it sounds like, what I'm getting is Final Fantasy has been my primary game for several years now. Guild Wars is right there with it as far as total playtime in a week, and then World of Warcraft trails behind. But when you look at the financial side of this, when you look at what it takes to get into these games, World of Warcraft and Final Fantasy are the ones collecting my money. Guild Wars is incredibly affordable, outrageously affordable, enough so that I feel a little bit bad. And I talked about it on a recent podcast with Jebro, and I think that it just feels odd because the way I'm used to paying subscriptions for games, and it just doesn't have one. So as far as what it takes to get in, are these games worth your money? What does it cost to get started? Guild Wars is going to be by far your best value. It's going to let you get all the way up. There are some things like there are other specializations, other versions of your job, your class, your profession. So like my warrior, my base warrior is included, but to get access to the Spellbreaker or Berserker build, I have to buy the expansions, and when End of Dragons comes out, I'll get another specialization added to warrior. So you have to kind of buy expansions to expand on the game, but it's lateral, right? You've got one of everything available, and you have to go left or right. You have to pay for the expansions to go that way. So if you don't mind moving around the world on foot, you can do that. But if you want to glide, you got to go left. If you want to mount, you got to go right. Currently, they're bundling Heart of Thorns and Path to Fire. I paid $30 for those, and then that's it. I'm all set until End of Dragons gets here. I don't need anything else. They're giving away the Living Seasons right now just for logging in regularly. So that's saving me the couple bucks that would cost. It's incredibly easy to stay caught up because it's just kind of do whatever you want. Now let's pivot that to what does it take to actually catch up. In World of Warcraft, it's very fast to get caught up. You just need to hit level cap. And so as soon as you hit level 60, you've done the campaign within Shadowlands, you get started on catch-up mechanics. And so you get started on doing dailies, you get started on getting into dungeons, raids, PvP, whatever system it is you want to catch up on. And then as soon as you're at the top, you start running on that treadmill. Should you ever fall off, there's catch-up gear to get you back on the treadmill, and then it's whoever can maintain the highest speed on the treadmill gets the best gear. And then everybody else is just on an adjacent treadmill running a little bit slower. And that's really it. The patches, looks like this expansion, are going to be few and far between. The content that's required to do outside of your lane is really up to you. People who want to play at the very top level have to dip into everything, but most casual players really don't. You can choose if you want to do things on one character or multiple characters. It's up to you how seriously you take it. The game will invite you to run as fast as that treadmill as you want. And so literally it's constantly advertising, just hit that up arrow, run a little bit faster, run a little bit faster. It can lead to a lot of burnout, but if you honestly look at what it's asking of you, you can slow down at any time. It doesn't matter. There are aspects of it where people have even complained that the story they want to get to is gated behind, like, I need to play this many weeks to get access to it. It really only wants the number of hours that you're willing to give it. But it's just going to keep asking more hours, more hours, more hours, more hours. And so it's up to you how disciplined you are about that, about getting what you want out of that game. It is a massive pile of content from the last 15 years. So for a new player, it's an incredible value. But it's up to you what you get out of it. Final Fantasy is very narrative based, and so you have to get through that story whether you like it or not. There is lots of systems within Final Fantasy to like besides story. So you do not have to like the story, but you do have to be aware of it. And so to play the game, you're going to have to clear story every single patch. And so you're going to have several hours of story constantly throughout the expansion that if you take a couple months off, you're going to come back, you're going to have some time in story. If you press escape, it's relatively quick, but if you enjoy that, if you stop and enjoy that story, it can be several hours of content depending on the patch. 5.5 and 5.55 is hours of story. And so that is what most things are gated behind. And so you're going to have to play a certain amount to stay caught up on story because it's so required. But everything after that is up to you. And it doesn't actually have a lot of the gear treadmill that World of Warcraft does. The gearing is a whole lot simpler. There is a treadmill to it. There is some tomestones and stuff you can cap. But anybody who's been playing 2 or more expansions may not cap their tomes every single week. There comes a point where you just look up and you go, I don't actually have to do this. And so it's a lot easier to not feel like you have to dip across multiple systems. It's a lot easier to feel like you're a top-end raider. You don't need to be clearing dungeons every week. It isn't that big of a piece of your life. Maybe you've got to cap your tomes, and then you're kind of done for the week. You're not clearing a bunch of Mythic 15s. And so it's a lot less demanding on the daily chore level if you want to be the fastest person on the treadmill. But for a casual player, both games can be shockingly similar. They are huge voids that will take as much of your time as you're willing to give them, and not an ounce more. You can stop whenever you want. They just want to make sure that buffet is big and full of food because you paid $15 roughly for access to it for 30 days. And so there are huge mountains of backwards content. Both games have massive amounts of content that is not tied to the current patch cycle. So even when the current patch cycle is not something you're interested in or is delayed, for new players, these are both incredible values each month, and it's up to you to go out and get whatever you think $15 is worth. Guild Wars is the easiest of these because nothing's required. Ever. You can stop any story you want and start on another one. You can progress into each system only as far as you want and only if you want. Things like the fractal system have agony resistance that one of the best ways for new players to learn about it and get it is to do fractals. World v World has its own ranks and progressions and reward tracks, and the best way to learn about it is to go into World v World. The special, or whatever the S stands for, PvP, is its own reward tracks, and there's ranked play locked behind, like you want to get to level 20. The best way to kind of learn about that is to go into SPVP. And so every system is this standalone island, and they've released this whole archipelago of islands over the years. And the strength of that is that you don't have to do anything. The weakness of that is you don't have to do anything. And so there's very little to invite you to the next island outside of a handful of daily quests that say, hey, try this thing. And you don't really necessarily know where to go. So it's easy to get lost. It's easy to feel like you don't have any source of direction. Once you know where you want to go, it's awesome that unlike these other games, there aren't these forced things that kind of say, hey, you have to do this first, and after that I'll give you some choice on what you do. It really is, you could just level up from whatever you want. You can level up cooking. You can do whatever it is you want to do. And I will just say the weakness of that is it's a little like being hungry at a friend's house, and you say, hey, I'm kind of hungry. Do you have any food? And they said, yeah, what do you want? And you go, well, what do you have? And they go, well, whatever you want. Okay, could you give me some examples? Whatever you want, man. Okay, you're not helping me. And so it can be a little overwhelming to a new player who's just not aware of what all is out there and how to get started on any of it. All three games have advantages. All three games have some form of inviting new players in and making sure that they have plenty of content available to them. They do varying jobs of inviting players into those content, holding their hand during it, and making sure that they clear the amount necessary to be considered a invested member of the community. And the community has varying expectations of its own of what the right and wrong way for a new player to do is and what should be expected of them when they're going to join the rest of us and kind of stop calling themselves new. All three communities have varying attitudes towards new players, especially if they're struggling to learn base mechanics. And all three communities have different feelings on what should be paid for, what new players should be expected to pay in as far as like what the devs actually ask of you, with Guild Wars being the most friendly and Final Fantasy probably being slightly worse than WoW because you have to kind of buy past expansions. But honestly, they're about the same. So I think that's it. I think that's kind of what you would need to get into these games. I think that's what you would need to kind of compare them for what do I really need to invest? How much time is going to be asked of me? I'm playing one of these games now. I'm looking at pivoting to one of the other two. I've always been interested. How does this compare? In my opinion, I think that in an expansion year, it's a really easy year for that expansion to kind of dominate the news cycle and be really exciting. So that's home field advantage. So, there's home games and away games. If it's your year to have an expansion inside that calendar year, it's home field advantage. Of these two, Guild Wars and Final Fantasy both have an expansion this year. To win on home field, it helps if you're coming off a winning streak. Shadowbringers was an incredible winning streak for Final Fantasy, and so they're coming off of a hot streak going into an expansion. World of Warcraft doesn't have an expansion this year, and they are struggling with a dry spell. So I don't list it among those two, but maybe Classic puts it up there with it. Maybe people really are that excited about Burning Crusade. It's just not in the same strength of position to leap into 2021 that the other two are. Guild Wars doesn't have these rapid-fire expansions, and so they kind of have to manufacture one. And so they've got all these hype events going on in-game, giving you things like extra experience in some of the modes to kind of help you up that silo, giving away some of the previous smaller DLCs. They're doing all these things to kind of generate some way of just encouraging the community to start forming, encouraging the community to say, hey, I know you missed that content. Why don't you come on back? It's not a sub. Just download the game. You pick up right where you left off and hop in with me. Let's go clear some of those living seasons together. Let's go do some of this style of content that you've never done before, or we used to always have fun sharing together. And so they're trying to kind of manufacture that. It's not as strong as what Shadowbringers is for Final Fantasy, but I will say that to invite somebody back to Final Fantasy, if they took a break in Stormblood or Heavensward, they've got to come buy Shadowbringers to join me and then clear all that story if they really want to join me in the new Eden raids or the new weapon series or anything like that. So it is a lot easier. It's a lower barrier. It's just less shiny things because it's been longer since their expansion. I think there are values to all three, and honestly, in my opinion, regardless of if any one of these games is in a weak position ever, whenever you're listening to this video, whenever you're considering, play where your friends are. Play where your friends are. All three of these games are improved by playing with a friend. Either sharing with a friend and you're both new, sharing with a friend who's played before, or sharing with a friend where you're the one that played before. Play with your friends. If you have a coworker, if you have somebody you've taken a class with, or a family member, a longtime friend, somebody who lives far apart and there's hardly any way to kind of remotely stay in touch, a small group of friends that doesn't really have an activity that they can all kind of agree on, MMOs are a great thing to consider. It is an incredibly fun social part. That's my personal bias. I play these games for a sense of community. I play these games to share them with other people, and my play time skyrockets when I play with other people. I'm spending most of my time off stream on Guild Wars right now because it's where my friends are. I've invited them to World of Warcraft. They passed on Shadowlands. I've invited them to Final Fantasy. They played it in the past. Right now they're on break, outside of a couple. I invited them to Guild Wars, and they're all playing the crap out of it. They're all working on legendaries. They're in ranked PvP. We're comparing mounts. We're comparing achievements. And it's something that's invited even friends in my group that have never played an MMO before because it's such a low barrier to entry. I think these other two are very, very full-featured, but it's not as easy to just hop in. Guild Wars is really, really, really approachable. And so we've been there to kind of answer their questions and help them over that kind of lost in the sandbox. And because we're there, they've been able to go to exactly and only the content they like. If they're saying they're not liking something, cool, let's just move on. Let's pivot you and get you into something you are. And so we have friends who don't have immense MMO experience trying the game. We have friends who have a lot of gaming experience but don't spend a bunch of time in their MMOs, but they kind of are aware of the concepts. The friend group has felt really impressive as far as how much they've been able to get out of Guild Wars. And so that's where I'm spending my time first and foremost, because these are games to play with people. That's my own personal bias. I know some people want these to be these single player experiences that the multiplayer is added on top. You could probably in some form or fashion play all three that way. It's just not how I play games. So I'm not going to be as educated on how to help you through that. But I'm sure there are people in the comments that can help you. I'm sure there are people who are aware of playing these games mostly as a chance to kind of unwind and not be around other people. There is not a wrong way to play these games as long as you're not hurting anybody else's ability to play. Have a blast. Get in. Try an MMORPG. It's a genre that I'm incredibly passionate about and have been since I first played one in 2004. And I don't see them going anywhere anytime soon, no matter what else I'm doing in gaming or anything else, kinda.